Oh yeah, I walked by there. I was thinking, so I'm like, I could like walk out and see anything, but I do. Yeah, you can. Yeah. Is that been a during restaurant?
That was mine. Taking the kids basically with me. Their purpose was always extra. Do you ever use Red and Red? Yes, that's basically what happened to me, and then I like it's very, which is a great name for a company. Very cautious. Curious, they're good kids.
Yeah, I went to
But every that makes you get pretty good.
yes, my mother was
So I use licorice and really. I don't like licorice. Did you see the Sunday
it's also been
You're the only other person I know who has different cases.
I asked my 3-year-old daughter what color it was.
yeah, probably
She did not use the word rose gold.
deliberately is not.
She said,
Yeah, and I'm not, and so you can learn. Is it your first one? What kind of fans? Licorice? Yes, black licorice. Do you like licorice? That's fine. Is that a reward for liking licorice? Like some licorice? Well, I got the answer right. We're good? It's 2 on 1. I love them. I should like the well, she took a back to the kitchen and like cut off the we're just gonna like, we're gonna kind of kitchen is stuff is right out here. Yeah, it's not like this. But I don't like that because sometimes
all right, we're gonna get started. I'm assuming we're gonna have a little bit of like post-lunch trickle / snoozing, so you know, do what you need to do. So thank you all for coming. This is, like, what's our full name? Think nationally, preserve locally, creating sustainable local television collections at your institution. And we're really excited to be part of the No Islands in the Stream kind of program of AMIA, which obviously a lot of us, you know, tap into these kinds of collections, and it's nice to kind of have some real emphasis on this. So we are being live streamed. Shout out to Siobhan Hagan, who's supposed to be here moderating this panel and put it together. She's not here, so if Siobhan or anybody else wants to tweet in questions to us later, use the hashtag NoIslands and AMIA18. That's up on the screen, but probably nobody can see it. So I'm Becca Bender. I'm the film archivist and curator at the Rhode Island Historical Society, where I have 4 local TV news film collections. I only started there about 2 months ago, so I don't know much about my collections yet, which is why I'm going to moderate and not answer any questions. So these guys all know way more about their collections. I'm going to have them introduce themselves shortly, but just in general, you know, this is meant to be conversational, actionable. Like, really, the idea here is we're sort of assuming the people in this room have a lot of this material, are dealing with it in whatever way they can, and really we want to talk about, you know, funding and what we can be doing. So we want this, you know, participants should feel free to respond to one another. We'll definitely take questions from the audience, and I'm certainly not adverse to anybody piping in as we're going. Like, I think, you know, let's just sort of be a little informal and kind of conversational about this. So this, you know, sort of grew out of the AMIA started back this local TV task force a couple years ago. This is all sort of, you know, part of the early stage of the local TV task force is figuring out how can we help, what should we be doing, what's most useful. And as maybe you guys have heard in other parts of this program today, there was a survey that was conducted last year. I'm just going to kind of give you a few sort of the takeaways from that survey, which Laura Treat was the person who kind of compiled all of also the results of it. There's going to be a link at the end of this presentation to the results. So we'll have that online also. We would love for people to look. There's a huge amount of information there. But just sort of some takeaways. So there were 39 custodians of local television who were surveyed. You know, the survey covered a lot of different aspects of what it means to have these collections. We're sort of focused here on the funding. And there definitely was a kind of clear takeaway that there was a big obstacle in terms of external funding, and also just institutional resources. And I think one of the things I want to talk about here is that also includes, does your institution value these collections, and sort of what does it mean as far as grant funding? Are you at the top of the list? Does your institution have other things that they're more interested in? So that's, you know, kind of part of this. So you know, multiple respondents indicated that they had applied for and received grants. Other people said they had applied for and not received grants. We definitely want to talk about that, what kind of, you know, was successful but wasn't. So, you know, and the big challenges being these kind of, like I said, institutional priorities. The idea of these, because these are local collections and we're sort of talking about regional things, is how do funders see us? You know, is there funders who want national significance in order to fund projects? Well, where do we fit into that? And how do we sort of, you know, prove our national significance even though we are by definition local collections? So we're going to kind of get into that sort of stuff as well. All of the participants here are either, I believe, academic institutions or historical societies, but I just want to point out that's not the only types of organizations that have these collections. Certainly Northeast Historic Films, that we all know, has a very large WCBV collection. Boston Public Library has a collection. You know, their Mississippi Department of Archives and History has a great collection. So we're going to be talking a lot from an academic perspective, but that's certainly not the only people who have these collections. So I'm going to have everybody introduce themselves like pretty briefly. We're not really going to tell you much about what we have. It's more just, let's start from the idea that like these are really challenging collections for a lot of different reasons. They tend to be really under-cataloged. We're all dealing with these collections that were created according to a station logic, and that station logic may have nothing to do with the logic that any archivist would consider logical. So, you know, let's just start from the idea that these are challenging, and we'll just kind of jump up from there. So I'm just going to ask the participants to kind of quickly say, you know, who you are, your organization. One big question, do you have support staff? How many, you know, maybe how many collections you have and whether you control copyright to them or not. Maybe give us a quick sense of, are you doing digitization on a sort of patron request way only, or are you working your way through your collections in sort of a non-patron driven way? I know these are getting, now this is like a long list of these are things I'm interested in. Yeah, and then we'll go from there. And we are going to go down the line, but we're going to skip Joy because Joy does not have a collection. Joy is from CLIR, which is very exciting. So Joy will introduce herself at the end and give us a little more information about some wonderful grants that can help us. Okay.
Thank you.
My name is Matthew. I am the film and photography archivist here at the Oregon Historical Society. So, as a side note, in addition to dealing with news film, I also deal a lot with news photography collections. We have a number of news film collections. We do basic reference digitization on site. Most of our materials are 16mm with mag. We do have some 3/4 inch video. I have Michelle Cribbs, who maybe some of you know. I work with her. She's a part-time employee. I have various interns that I get from local universities. One of them over there is Ryan, who's here. So a little bit of support, but it's a little ad hoc. Most of our work is also driven by patron requests. Patrons oftentimes would be documentary kind of commercial projects, but a lot of smaller things too. You know, somebody thought was interviewed in Vietnam or something like that, and they just want to copy this because he just passed away from something.
Yep, sounds good.
Hi, I'm Natasha Margulis. I'm from Arkansas State University. I'm the digital archivist. I just graduated to that position. And also the political collections archivist. We have 1.5 archivists, and I know you all know what a half an archivist is. The head archivist is actually part of heritage studies, so he's a good link, but he's happiest when he's sitting behind his computer and going through files and helping me write grants. And we have a relatively good-sized collection from the 1970s, 16mm news film, and we are hoping to add more decades and more types of formats to that collection. It had a lot of really interesting problems, which if you want to ask me what they are later, I can probably address those better, and some of you would have a lot more sympathy for me at that point. And then I have a really great library systems team that helps us, but they also have to do the work of everybody else in the library. And we are hopefully moving towards stealing one of them and maybe keeping them forever and locked up on our floor. We have the 7th floor, and the library is the 6th through 1st floor. So I'm very glad to be part of this today. I'm very excited to hear what you guys have to talk about as well.
Hi, I'm Emily Vinson. I'm from the University of Houston. I'm the AV archivist and the curator of the KUHT collection, which is a pretty large public broadcasting collection, as well as the public radio station from Houston, KUHF. And then I just got an email like an hour ago that we just acquired another local television collection, which I'm really, really excited about. I have no support staff, and I have no budget. Copyright is cool for us because KUHT and KHF are owned by the University of Houston. We have a great relationship with them, so we can put anything online, which is like awesome. They're very flexible. Our digitization, we both do patron requests, which we can do a limited number of formats on site. The collection itself has a huge variety of formats. Everything else has to be sent out. And then we are doing some non-patron driven, like systematic digitization that is all grant based. I've been there for going on 4 years, and we just received our 3rd grant to work on kind of a more systematic approach to digitization.
Hi, I'm Ruta Abolins. I'm at the Brown Media Archive and Peabody Awards collection at the University of Georgia. We have 6 news collections. Our biggest one is WSB in Atlanta, and we received a second part of that donation of videotape that came to us completely digitized. We have licensing rights to most of our material, and so I would say our content ends in about 2010 for the news content right now. We also have the Peabody Awards, which has a lot of news content in it as well. So that runs from 1941 to the present. So local news, I think, is really important in that collection. We digitize on request all the time. It's pretty much a daily thing, which I find unbelievable and feels rather overwhelming. But we do have a larger staff than some folks. We have, including myself, it's 8.5 people who work in the department. We've received some grants in the past.
Hi, my name is Amy Moorman, and I'm the college archivist at Wartburg College, where we house the Archives of Iowa Broadcasting. And in the Archives of Iowa Broadcasting, we have 14 collections that relate to local television. 7 of those were donated directly from television stations. We also have 7 additional collections that were donated from specific broadcasters themselves. And those 14 collections represent 10 different stations across the state of Iowa. Unfortunately, we only have copyright for 1 of those 14 collections, mostly due to a lack of paperwork. And that's actually like a rolling copyright, so anything that's older than 20 years automatically reverts to us. And let's see, in terms of digitization efforts, most of what we do is patron-driven. We're moving more into, institutional projects. I've been there about 2.5 years now, so working on getting more into that. I am a lone arranger, so I don't have any support staff. I'm currently supervising 9 students and 1 volunteer who help me with a variety of projects in the broadcasting archives and the college archives. Yeah, that's fine.
So I get to go last. My name is Joy Banks, and I am a program officer for CLIR. For those of you who are not familiar with CLIR as an organization, we are an independent nonprofit organization, and we support the work of libraries, archives, and museums through promotion, publication, and programming. We have about 18 geographically distributed employees in the organization, and there are about 3.5 of us that work exclusively for the grants. And so the 3.5 of us manage the grant programs from the whole cycle, from application to final report. We manage these, but we're not actually a funding agency. That's an important differentiation. We receive funding for the digitizing hidden special collections and archives and the Recordings at Risk programs from the generous support of the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. So we actually also submit our own grant applications and can totally commiserate with you as you do reports and fill out your applications. So I wanted to just quickly, I was asked to quickly review the 2 grants that we currently support. So that is what this slide is. The Digitizing Hidden Collections is the larger of the 2 programs that we have right now. And this awards about $4 million for each call. The award amounts can be larger and the projects can be longer. This program also supports collaborative work efforts. So you can have multiple institution programs, and you can also include Canadian organizations with this, as long as a US-based organization is the primary institution on the project. So there's really a lot of creative ways that you can build these. Recordings at Risk is a smaller program. We award about $500,000 each cycle for this. Traditionally, it's been 2 award cycles each year. We have guaranteed funding through cycle 5, which opens on Monday. Plug for our applicant recipient webinar next Thursday. We are in the process of renewing this program. We are hopeful it will be renewed. We will make that announcement in the spring. For the Recordings at Risk, digitization must be done by an external service provider, which is not the case for hidden collections. That can be in-house or through a service provider. And for Recordings at Risk, the allowable costs for the program are a bit more restrictive in terms of how you can spend the money. All of this information is available on our program website, and so much more. We have sample applications, sample proposals. We provide templates for the applications. We do try to make this process as transparent as possible. There is a slightly different focus for each of the programs. For hidden collections, the emphasis is more on access to the materials that you're digitizing. And then the applications are evaluated against the program's 6 core values, which are scholarship, comprehensiveness, connectedness, collaboration, sustainability, and openness. So in all efforts as you form a proposal, you should keep those 6 core values in mind. For recordings at risk, the emphasis is really on the preservation of these at-risk materials, and the proposals are evaluated against the potential for scholarly and public impact, the urgency of reformatting, viability for long-term preservation, and the cost effectiveness of the proposal. There are a couple of similarities I just wanted to really quickly say. Successful applicants must make their metadata accessible through a CC0 license for both programs. Both programs allow exceptions and provisions for culturally sensitive materials or materials that describe or belong to marginalized communities. We recognize that you can't always make everything available. And then finally, proposals to both programs are evaluated by a separate independent review panel. So each program has its own review panel. These aren't evaluated by the staff. And the review panel is, they're the group that makes the final decisions about funding.
Okay, in the interest of moving things along, and because it takes a while to hand the microphone down, and we have to do it because we're on the camera. Anyway, in terms of just quickly who uses this stuff, I'm gonna say what I think is probably true, and everybody tell me if it's not true in your case. But I mean, I think a lot of our use, the majority of our use is probably coming from documentary filmmakers. Maybe, no, okay, great, I'm gonna hand it down to you in a second. There's gonna be another whole panel kind of talking about scholarly use later, and I think that's something that, when people talk about grants, we need to sort of figure out this grantors who often want scholarly use, but is that not what a lot of our use is necessarily, and all of that. But, and I'm also curious about whether everybody, the majority of people using collections are in fact local and in your community and say coming there, or are people who are remote. I see Ruta's shaking her head. So I'm gonna just sort of send the mic down, jump in if you feel like you have something to say in this regard, and yeah.
I will just add to documentary filmmakers as artists. I especially reach out to artists a lot, and when they find out what we have, they get really excited and use it. And also as podcasts and things like that, audio-based things are coming up. Yeah.
Actually, our biggest group of users currently are just general community, or just people in the community. I was kind of surprised. It's either people who are in the footage themselves or family members. So that's been kind of interesting to learn. And then we do not have any, so far, have not really had anybody, any local. They're all really kind of, via email or phone. We don't have we don't have really the ability on site for people to view our footage. Everything has to be sent out to be digitized before we can provide access to it. And also, I think just geographically, because of where we're located, it's just a lot easier for people to, make their requests that way. But that's kind of our unique situation.
A lot of external users, a lot of documentary filmmakers. One of our local uses, though, is there are documentary classes at UGA, and so we've had more students asking to use content, which we will provide. There's no charge for that to the students. However, I do ask them to, if they plan on going forward with their production, that they do need to come back and license and do everything as part of it. And I want to make that part of their learning experience too, just to sort of get them on the right track. This is it. It's really hard. We make it look easy, but it's not that easy.
So then I guess I'd be curious, Joy, to have you respond to something like a collection, right, that is largely being used by community people I was in that footage or something like that, how does that fit into, you know, your review panels?
So for both of the programs, there is a notion that they want to see how the materials that will be digitized can have a reach outside of your community. To connect the content of your collections to a broader conversation that's happening, either about a current issue or about an issue that has some sort of historical significance. So I don't think that having collections that are primarily accessed by local interests necessarily excludes you from that conversation. But it does become the burden of the applicant to explain how your institution will work to broaden the impact of your collection and to market it to unexpected audiences, maybe audiences that might not be your typical community of users, looking to subject specialists, reaching out to the academic environment to see if there's a greater use for it. But then apart from that, just because your most common users maybe come from a local area, that doesn't mean that the process for your project doesn't have to limit your materials in that way. So thinking creatively about how you might provide access to your metadata. The review panelists have become increasingly interested in metadata that can be manipulated and accessed by data mining and machine-based resources so that it can have a possibility to be linked with something else that you might not even know about in sort of a more free, open internet, open archive sort of environment. Yes, but there is always room, but it is the burden of the applicant to explain that to the review panelists. They understand that local TV is important, but you've got to say more than that. Like, they get that. So you need to explain why this particular collection that you're interested in preserving has some sort of broader significance to not just your identified community of users.
Okay, so now I do want to just kind of quickly go down the line, or not so quickly, whatever, in terms of have you applied for grants before? Were you successful? Were you not? I know sometimes not, but I'm sure there are successes, and we definitely want to be like, yay, successes. And I'm also curious, again, kind of getting back to that question of institutional support, you know, what did it take for you to maybe put that argument forward that your part, you know, was of the institution was sort of due for this grant or application?
I've only been here for 5 years, maybe a little more. Just before my time, my predecessor applied for an NEA or NEH grant, did not get it. Since that time, I have not applied for any grants that are related to our news film collections at all. No, sorry. I've looked at CLIR grants, and I run into the same thing. I was just on the phone thing a little while ago. You look at what gets funded, and then you look at what's in your collection. It's very hard to find that thing that will fit. So that's obviously, I think, where everybody has the frustration.
We've had a lot of institutional support as we're part of the library, but the university itself is not really looking at us for any reason. Currently, the budget situation has put on the burden of the library, which is now my burden, to get grants and to kind of bolster up and so it's the audiovisual collection that we have that we're basing it on. We've had grant success at the regional level and at the state level, but not at the national level yet. And we've kind of crushed some really great barriers of obtaining copyright from a guy who grew up in Arkansas and now just sold the Sacramento Kings, who said, fine, sure, you can have it. And then we find another wall in our way of, oh boy, we're a state university, and this is state property, and we can't just put it out there for free. So that kind of hinders us in some of the grants as well. And also, we had no information about what was on the reels. We recently had it preserved, and all the slugs that contained the information were wrapped up in the reels, and I got those back like a month ago, and I was dancing around, I know it's on my film, I got Johnny Cash, and I have a lot of racist slurs, and some streakers, and some things I'm really scared about, but it's usually 2 words and a date. So that's also really hard in a grant situation to describe the significance when you just see the word Clinton. And I have Clinton. And he's got really, really curly short hair. You would not believe it's him. He's trying to convince you that, yes, he's old enough to be the Attorney General. Almost like your cardigan, so.
We've had some success. So I would say first, as far as institutional support goes, I think that my institution is very happy for me to apply to grants, so that's wonderful. I do think it's always really important, though, to talk to the people that are going to have a lot of responsibilities post-grant before you apply, because you're creating a lot of work for other people and a lot of storage requirements for other people. So that's just a pro tip. Learn maybe the hard way on some of these things. So I've had 2 grants from something called Text Treasures, which is in Texas and administered by the Texas State Library and Archives Commission, but the money comes from IMLS. And in our case, the Text Treasures grant, they really want it to be Texas-centric, and so it's really easy to make the case for those. And so those 2 were successful, and then I just recently were very gratefully awarded a CLIR Recordings at Risk grant, and that one we were, I was denied the first time, but got great feedback and reapplied and was successful the second time. And talking about the challenge of making a regional television collection more largely interesting to a national audience. So my station was originally an educational station, so I focused solely on those early educational films and kind of connected it to distance learning going on now, and trying to kind of paint a picture that this is part of a continuum. So these early telecourses and how they relate. So that was my approach to kind of find a subsection of the collection to really narrow the scope of.
So, hi. We've had a lot of successes with the Peabody Awards collection. Primarily, we've had 3 grants over the years, and we've got one now with NHPRC in collaboration with the American Archive of Public Broadcasting. So it's 4,000 items related to public broadcasting. So there is some news content that will be part of that. We had tried in the past for a metadata grant to help describe the WSB videotape collection that's already digitized, but there's a lot of work, obviously, to try and capture the information on a video cassette, etc. So we did try 3 times and did not get it, and haven't tried since, although I wouldn't be opposed to trying again. I'm not sure, I'm actually not sure what the particular problem was trying to get this metadata done, because if it's already digitized, I assumed, hey, someone would want to support us for the metadata. It didn't happen. However, I think I'm going to just have to take a different tack with that, and I liked your suggestion when you were just talking. So I think for me, hearing how other people are doing this will be really helpful, just in terms of reconfiguring or repicturing how to apply for a particular grant and to rethink how to do it.
Ruta, what was the metadata grant you were applying for? What program was that?
It was NEH.
NEH, okay.
Okay, so I also have what I would consider a pretty good support from my institution. I have a fairly complicated funding for the archives. We have, our operating budget is sort of within the library, so part of my funding comes from the library budget, part of it comes from an endowment fund that was set up by the founder of the Archives of Iowa Broadcasting, part of it comes from a gift fund that, from private donors. So the institution, when I was hired, made it pretty clear that a lot of the projects that we need to get done are going to require grant funding. My position was supposed to be kind of the support position for writing grants. The library director was supposed to, take the lead on that. Unfortunately, we've not had a library director for a year and a half, so I am now the grant writer. So in 2017, I actually wrote 7 grant applications for the collection at large, not specifically local television collections, and we were awarded 3 grants. So I was pretty happy with that, especially because I'm the one that has to now implement all 3 projects. We also received a CLIR Recordings at Risk grant. That was for one of our radio collections, but we had the same experience where we didn't get it the first time and got great feedback. Our primary issue was we didn't have a signed donor agreement for the collection the first time, so we were able to use the feedback and go back to the station and say, hey, we'd really love to digitize these materials, but this granting agency is not going to do it if you don't sign this donor agreement. And they were like, okay, sure. So if only it was so easy, right? All of those situations. So the largest grant that we were able to get was an NEH Humanities Collections and Reference Resources grant, and that is for the entire collection. Basically, we're cataloging all of the media items in the Archives of Iowa Broadcasting, which is close to 30,000 items, but it includes also digitization of about 2,400 videotapes from one of our local television collections. So it's a big project for us, so it's pretty exciting.
Thanks. So the feedback, the grant feedback stuff, I think is fascinating. I want to hear Joy talk some more about this, and I think it also starts leading us into the other part of this conversation and what this whole No Islands in the Stream program is about, which is collaboration. But I think we also, whether the people on in this room, let's say, feel as though we're in competition potentially for grant dollars, and maybe we are, and maybe we feel that way. I think we also have, whether we feel that way or not, sometimes our institutions feel that way. And I'm just curious to think about, as we talk about, and this is something that the TV Task Force is very much focused on, what are the kind of shared resources that we can be compiling for one another? Is something like grant feedback, not necessarily the specifics of it, but is that something, I've never heard that talked about as a potential shared resource. And I don't know how people feel about that, because are we all competing for these CLIR grants? So I might start with Joy, and then to talk a little bit about the feedback process maybe, and whether you think, quite truthfully, our collections are in competition with one another. And then sort of, I want to get into this notion of collaboration and how can we sort of all bolster one another. And there was a round table, even more informal round table earlier out in the pavilion talking about a summit, a local television summit, and the notion of how do we make ourselves kind of visible on the national scene or raise our awareness in general. And I think that is a way, right, that if we can get sort of past this hurdle, particularly if this is a concern for funders of us having national significance, if we can sort of maybe pass through what might be an uncomfortable period, does it then get us to this really, really important new level where we are local stuff that comes together and creates national history, which obviously it does, so.
Okay, so we'll start with reviewer feedback. For CLIR programs, we have no limit on the number of times that you can apply for a grant. If you follow all the directions and click submit, then we will send you reviews. there is an obligation if you do return as a return applicant for both programs. They do ask that you explain in, I think it's 500 words or less, what you've done to address the reviewer comments that you received. And when we are assigning applications, we do, as a staff, we try to give you the best chance possible. So I think at some point I was supposed to talk about the makeup of our review panel, but we have a pretty diverse review panel for both programs that have both subject specialists and technical specialists. And we try to assign a mix of people who would understand your project to the best of their knowledge. I mean, obviously there's no way that we can have every specialist ever to meet these specific things, but our goal as staff is to give you the best chance possible for funding. So that means that we keep track of the panelists that were assigned to you before. We note their initial reactions to your projects. We track the comments that they made. And so in the assignment process, we respond to that and assign applications to give you the best chance. It is totally up to you as applicants whether or not you want to share the anonymized comments from review panelists that you receive back. We don't care what, they're yours. They're your comments to do with as you see fit. And I will say too that as a person who wrote grants before I started working for CLIR, I often would reach out to funded projects that seemed like maybe they would have a similar sort of project structure or rights issues that I was dealing with to see if they would be willing to share applications with me. And I mean, we're all people, I think, we're all people, and we're all professionals, and we often don't want to reinvent the wheel. And most people that I found were more than happy to share the resources that they had to help somebody else, especially if they'd already been funded, then they aren't in competition with you anymore. To address the question of whether you're in competition with each other, in the sense that everybody who submits a grant during any given cycle is in competition with one another. Yeah, it's the same pool of funds. It's the same limited resources. If we had all the money in the world, we would fund everyone, but we can't. So if I would, like, I've tried to reflect on this question a little bit and how the process works. In the initial review of the applications, I would say that review panelists tend to think of the applications more in a void. So they're just looking at your application and they're reflecting on it and they're writing their comments. They're giving it an initial score that helps guide our conversation during their in-person meeting. So they have this initial gut reaction, and that's the opportunity that you have to sell your case. This is the time that you want to make the review panelists assigned to your application super excited about your project, because when they come to the in-person meeting and we start to talk about things, you want to have a memorable project. You want to not be the one where they're like shuffling through their papers to think, well, I don't really remember what that was. Because that's, at the end of the day, when they start comparing projects to each other and start to make the final decisions about what will get the funding, they're gonna look for the most compelling applications. And some of the higher ranked ones sometimes move down a little bit further because somebody was really excited about a project and they fight for you. I've seen it happen. It's really exciting. You would think like after 7 hours it wouldn't be as exciting, but it really is. I mean, certainly thinking about creating effective collaborations, I think most of the national funders are interested in that because we want the best return on our investment. So if you're thinking about doing a large-scale project that would connect a network of similar collections across the country, and it can be a model or even an ongoing resource that can help influence projects down the road, that's going to be a lot more exciting as a funding possibility than I want to digitize my local collections and make them available to my users, and that's it. Like, do you see the difference between those two ideas from a funder's perspective? So I think, like, in the Digitizing Hidden Collections program, there is certainly the capacity in that program to develop a really dynamic local TV media project that would really get the panel excited about how these resources can impact a national conversation. You know, they're looking at things that are happening now. The panelists, they're meeting, they're people, they come together, they have friends, they have families, they have political interests, like, and as an independent funder, we have the flexibility to reflect conversations that are happening now. So things like the environment, things like diversity, conversations that are happening around indigenous languages. These are things that if you have a way, like, oh my gosh, I forgot your name, sorry, yes, Emily, yes, like Emily said, that she took the feedback from the review panelists, looked at her collection, and found something that was exciting about now that connected her collection to what was happening now. And those are the things that I think it's hard, especially when you don't know what's on your reels, because that's truth. And it's difficult to know, especially if you have at-risk materials where you don't want to touch them until you're ready to process them. But you can make educated guesses about your collections. You can probably assume that video reels in the 60s might have been dealing with conversations that were happening in the 60s about different social conversations. So you can make educated guesses. You know. Yeah, that was a very long answer, I think. But I think I hit on all the big points on those questions, so.
Yeah, thank you. What time? Let's see. What time is it? Yes, go for it.
So CLIR does try to make our panel, our review process as transparent as possible. So we also provide all of the questions that we ask review panelists to consider to you, the applicants. So it's, you know, probably in your best interest to look at the questions that review panelists are considering as they're assessing your proposals to see if you answered them all. Because if you haven't answered them, then there's going to be a gap when they're reviewing it.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one thing, the challenge of making things sort of more nationally available. So I think an easy thing that I've done on all the grants I've written is include all the metadata in the AAPD, which Ruta also mentioned. And not only does that, you know, I think is a very appealing to a granting agency, but it really like has served us. So I think a not insignificant number of researchers have found our collections solely based on that they would have never like been like, let me look at the University of Houston, like they would never have found us, but because of that resource, it kind of is twofold in its benefits.
So I do want to open it up to questions so that we have time, but I also want to let panelists speak on any sort of collaborations that they've had or shared resource stuff. So if anybody want to, yeah.
All right, well, I'll say this. We have not found our perfect collaboration yet, but we are waiting for the Tinder app to come out so we can swipe and swipe. The best suggestion I have is to know your collections, and the best way to do that is to do pilot projects with media services companies. They'll cut you deals, they'll do you demos, they'll introduce you to people who have like projects. And then you can kind of start a dialogue, and maybe it won't be that eternal friendship you're looking for when you apply for the grant, but you know what someone else is doing out there, so I'm still looking for my collaboration. But every day it gets bigger and bigger, the similarities I see between us and other things. And it really is because of my media services people that we've been introduced to this world. And That's how I learned about my collection in the first place, and that's how other people are going to learn about your collection as well. They're the first ones to see it if you can't play it on a reel, and they're the last people you talk to. They give you special reports and updates and help you with grants. So that's kind of my takeaway for this whole collaboration exercise is don't give up. Someone's out there for you, and you can work together, but you just got to find them.
Hi, everybody. I just want to mention a book that just came out called Rediscovering U.S. News Film, Cinema, Television, in the Archive. A lot of scholars got together and did research using television, news film, or newsreel collections. And it's in this book. It's expensive, so I would have your library purchase it.
What was the name of the book again?
It's called Rediscovering U.S. News Film, Cinema, Television, in the Archive. It's an AFI film reader's book, and it's available through Routledge. You can get it on Amazon. But like I said, you might want to try your library. But anyway, there is a section also from archives in here, and different archival collections. Georgia is in here, but Los Angeles, UCLA Film and Television Archive is in there, and other collections. So it's a compendium, and I think what I would also like to say is these scholars really want to work with our collections, and we want to work with them. And I think we need to find some ways to do that. I know that's something that Caroline Frick is interested in doing and talked about today. So I think that's one way to also help funders see the value in what we have. I mean, you know what it is, but I think, it helps to have that connection.
So are there questions? Yeah. I'm gonna pass the mic since we're on the.
So I don't have a question as much as I just have a comment.
Yes, more comments, please.
I'm a digitization service provider. Many of you guys know me, but for those who don't, I just wanted to share this thought for you guys who are applying for grants. When you're looking at your vendors, if you're looking to outsource, please work with them as a partner. One of the most eye-opening things happened about 2 or 3 years ago when one of my clients actually shared the reviews from one of their grant reviews. And it just gave me so much insight into how I can better my proposals for them and be a better advocate when I'm writing my proposals. And even when you're just exploring, looking at taking on a project, let them know that you're applying for a grant. Let them know which grant you're applying for, because then we can make better recommendations around not only file types, but also storage and how to process everything and be aware of timelines and things of that nature. And so we can gear our proposals in a better way to help advocate on behalf of your collection. So.
Question from Twitter, please.
Siobhan.
Yes, let Siobhan speak.
All right. So Siobhan tweeted, I am all about a local TV presentation network grant proposal. And Joy says that would be stronger than one solitary collection. I think a focus on 2-inch quad or maybe open reel video / the most at risk would be a good selection process. But what do you think?
Yes. Yes. All right, the answer to that was yes. Okay. Are there other questions from out there? Yep, oh please, do you want to speak?
Well, so CLIR is always looking for ways that we can facilitate the conversations that you want to have to form these collaborative partnerships. So if you have any good ideas about that, we've tried like open Google Sheets where people can put interest. It wasn't very successful, but it could have just been the year. So like, let us know how we can help make these collaborations happen.
I think that it's really strong to have an introduction to other people, or at least having somebody pointing you towards those people. You can make your own choices about talking to them or not. I've had a couple people talk to me about this collaborative idea, and especially pointing to Emily and saying you need to go talk to her and talk about the collections that you're not working on right now that you're going to be working on in a year or two, and start working on this collaborative grant together. And I was like,
I can't even think about that right now. But this got me excited, and actually being in the same room got me excited. So I think that's really super important, compared to like a Google Doc. Maybe have a hangout with video and real faces and people talking in real time, I think is really super important, even if it's not in the same room.
I went to the community archiving workshop panel. All right, thank you. The cause, that's all I could think was CAW. If you were there, what's really great is they go in and then they help a group for a day process a collection or something like that. I think it's fabulous. And I sit here wondering, well, would somebody fund a grant for a bunch of us to go to another organization and help them with a process? And like if we did that in groups, I don't know if that's possible, but it's something I was thinking about when I was at that panel.
Hi, Ruta. That's exactly what we're thinking at the Vanderbilt TV News Archive. We want to share our knowledge about live capture, because all libraries and archives legally can capture news and create a collection out of it. And so we'd like to show people how to capture local news, because we can't do that. Our scope is just national news, but there's a tremendous need for us to preserve local news, and I think we can do more with that.
A word on that, because it's actually my thesis topic was on preservation of born digital present-day local news. And as I'm sure you've talked to probably the Internet Archive and UCLA Newscape, but that's, other things I think in terms of thinking about how we sort of nationalize the value of ourselves. I think if we bring local news, present day, particularly in the world of, CLIR broadcasting, where people are actually thinking about this and thinking about how does being able to see multiple stations around the country, let's say, and how they are presenting news. And UCLA has a program that grew out of, or still lives in, the anthropology department, and it's very much about the linguistics, what kind of language is being used to present local news. And I think also thinking and tying ourselves in with scholars and all of that notion of how is our little piece where we are, how does it fit into this bigger, this bigger thing, I think will kind of continue to move us in that way. So I'm certainly very interested in talking more about live capture stuff. Yeah, George.
I have a statistic that you might find interesting. The news archive at the Internet Archive gets 400,000 hits a month. So apparently somebody's interested in this stuff. In terms of creating this collaboration, what can we do at next year's conference? Do we send people around with pins that say, hey, I'd like to collaborate? Do we make it ask them to make it part of the registration? Would you like people to know that you'd like to collaborate? Do we have a slot in the pavilion about opportunities to collaborate, bring your collections ideas?
George, I think that's a great idea. That's something definitely that I've been wanting to look at with our local TV and scholars is a tender for scholars and historians with matching them. We're having office hours, particularly at conferences that aren't moving image archives conferences. So I think that's also something that we need to look at, is moving outside of AMIA and finding the connections with the scholars that can help us provide that national significance.
I'm standing rather off because I was back in the corner, sorry. I just wanted to, I think this is a great conversation. I think it brings us into wonderful collaborative space, but it's also very academic in a way. And we're talking about grants, and we're applying for grants. And I want to go back to the point about who is using this content. The vast majority of our users are actually the public, people whose family members were in these films, and documentarians, right? And the general public. That's who's going to the Internet Archive. And one of the questions I would pose, and I know we don't have time now, but indeed, if anybody has models for sponsorship, and I mean corporate sponsorship. If you have models for, say you had I'm in Texas, so my dream is to find that wealthy Texas oil man who's just going to love what we do, and so that's why Emily and I are going to talk about this later. But if you have a model for someone who is very interested and passionate, how maybe you've told them about your collection, I think that we have to think more broadly outside of, as wonderful as CLIR is, we have to think outside of these academically oriented grant projects. So I would just implore, when we think about sustainability, if anybody has great examples or models, I think in Arkansas, Tyson recently funded a major news project, and I read it and screamed, and I said, yeah, Tyson's doing it, there have to be others that will. And so one of the things that I'd love to hear from is if you have some models for that kind of work as well.
Yeah, we only have a few more minutes, but I do want to give it back to the panelists to get last thoughts in.
So just to respond to that, we have seen success from most recently recordings at risk recipients who have discovered additional materials while you're digitizing, because that's how it rolls in archives. And we can't give you more money to digitize these things, but because they've already received funding, because they've shown that there is an interest and support for this, then they're able to turn around and go to local funders, sometimes corporate funders, and say, look, we've got X number of materials, we really want to do this right now, we can get a discount from the vendor because it's all rolled into the same project, will you give us money? And more often than not, they will, because it's a very specific thing. And I think that's the key with looking at funding sources outside of large grant agencies. When you're looking at local foundations, when you're looking at corporate foundations, they want very specific outputs, they want very specific timelines, they want very specific costs. And if you can communicate those things effectively, you really will set yourself up for a better opportunity. But we definitely encourage that. It's often a combination of funding sources that get these materials processed. And if you're excited about something, you can make somebody else excited about it too.
Any final thoughts? Yes, sorry.
I would just like to add that a lot of us are really caught up on the ideal. And remember, there's no trusted digital repository out there that meets all the qualifications, and we're all in the same boat when it comes to local TV collections as well. And I have to stop envying what other people have and recognize what my own strengths are and maybe how I can emphasize those better, and talking to you and on an individual level and an institutional level helps a lot. So I would really like to open up conversations. Any of these suggestions, a tag, a big hat that says, I want a friend to write a grant with, anything like that would be an awesome way to go out of this.
Yeah, and I would say, everybody who's here, get in touch with, sorry, I'm Laura to dump it all on you, the local TV task force. But you also, my email is up there, everybody's emails are up here. I'm happy to try to connect and facilitate, and just in general, I think there is a lot of momentum in the past couple of years at AMIA. It seems around this, which is great. So, let's roll with it. Thanks, everybody.